Good afternoon and welcome once again to the POLITY, reaching you live from the Abuja studios of KAFTAN television. Now, the conversation surrounding the issue of fuel subsidy removal continues to grow strong, and our various stakeholders have sought to educate the public and also bring to the fore the issues that should be the focus as regards negotiations between labor unions and the federal government, and also involving other stakeholders and other sectors, and that is in respect to palliatives and measures that could ameliorate the situation for millions of Nigerians out there. Today on the program, I've been joined by Mr. Nick Agule to speak on these issues. He's a chartered accountant, and he will be doing some justice to how he sees or believes this process and this policy can best be suited to the average Nigerian experience. Welcome to the program. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Famous.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Good afternoon to our viewers.
Thank you for coming. Before we go into your now widely known set of recommendations, let's quickly start with your analysis, your basic analysis on the situation, the manner in which subsidy was removed. Were you expecting this, and how do you think it has gone so far?
Thank you very much for that question. I wasn't expecting that the subsidy will be removed in the manner in which it was. I know and I have advocated that this subsidy regime has outlived its usefulness. But there's a way you go about. I make the analogy that you can extract a tooth or amputate a limb by way of saving a life, but there's also a way you can amputate a limb that will take that life, will kill it. And I think the way the subsidy was removed is the latter position. Because first and foremost, we were told that the 2023 budget had subsidy provided for till the end of June. So on the minimum, we were expecting that is the time frame within which the current government was going to think about removing or extending the subsidy regime. And that would have given this government about a month from the 29th of May to 30th of June to look at the data themselves. Because the president has been out of power. He's not been in the presidency. So everything that he's known about subsidy is as probably revealed to him, or he was reading it off the press as every one of us. Now he had the opportunity as commander-in-chief to summon anybody in Nigeria that is involved in this subsidy scheme to come to him with the data. And it is based on that data that he would have now been able to take smart decisions about subsidy. He didn't do that. Without looking at the data, without knowing anything about subsidy, he just removed subsidy in his inaugural speech. Now, saying that subsidy was no more, because he said he didn't have a budget for subsidy. And we read that to mean he didn't have a budget from the 1st of July 2023 for subsidy, which would have been correct. Otherwise, he has a budget for subsidy up to 30th of June. The subsidy, the whole subsidy thing, why I expected the president to first understand the data is that it's like a dark box. There are two metrics that are used in computing subsidy. Number one is the landing cost, because it is the landing cost that determines the actual amount of subsidy. So if the NNPC says we landed petrol at 250, and the government says sell it at 200, then subsidy is 50. So that the landing cost is the first metric. The second metric is the quantity consumed. So if the quantity consumed is 1 million liters per day and subsidy is 50, then subsidy B is 50 million per day. As we speak, and I believe the president, President Tinubu, had no idea about the landing cost, about the actual consumption of petroleum products in Nigeria before he went to the villa. On the day of his inauguration, he didn't have that data because the NNPC doesn't provide that data to anybody. So this was an opportunity for him to summon everyone involved, summon the NNPC, summon the downstream authority, summon the central bank, summon the Minister of Finance, summon the budget people into a room and say, I want to see the numbers. And I can assure you that if he had checked the numbers, there are two aspects to subsidy. There's a legit subsidy. Because if there is no subsidy, petrol wouldn't be selling at 195. But then there is also a fraudulent side to the subsidy. Once President Tinubu understood the numbers, he would have been able to differentiate between the legit and the fraud. By taking out the fraud, he could probably have halved the subsidy bill that Nigeria is facing. And then there's the other aspect of subsidy, which is the quantity. Because we hear that the quantity is being smuggled across the borders. So everything that we're paying subsidy on is not being consumed by Nigerians. If President Tinubu summoned the head of customs, the chief of air force, the chief of army, the inspector general of police, and the head of immigration to a room and said, if one truck of petrol escapes from Nigeria into a neighboring country, you lose your job. He would have handled the quantity issue. Meaning the entire petrol upon which subsidy is being paid will be consumed within Nigeria. And that would have taken down the quantity consumed by another half. So if you put the fact that he will cut down the subsidy, the amount of subsidy by half and the quantity by half, then he could probably would have used this remaining budget of 1 month to pay for subsidy for another few months, within which he needed to have taken certain steps. Step number one, as we speak today, it's only the NNPC that is bringing petrol into Nigeria. President Tinubu needed to summon the NNPC into a room and say, we have given you 4 refineries to work with and give us petrol and other petroleum products. You allowed the refineries to die. How then are you the only person now who is benefiting from your refineries dying by going to import petrol and bring it for Nigerians? Step aside. And immediately, with an executive order, he would have opened up the gateway for every Nigerian businessman or woman to go and bring that petrol.
Just to cut in there.
Yeah.
Can you venture a guess or a reason why this is the way it is? Why is only the NNPC allowed? What do you think they're trying to correct or forestall or prevent from happening, that the NNPC has that sole power?
There is nothing, as I can see it from where I'm standing, that makes the NNPC the only authority to import petrol, meaning they are the only people who can give us a price. When they give us a price, there's no one else who is able to give us a lower price, which true competition normally brings. Yeah, there is no reason, because look at the transportation sector. Let's say the federal government says, transportation is so important, it's so key, that I will need the NNPC to be the only one importing petrol. But with only petrol, will you transport anybody? Answer is no. You need the vehicles, don't you? But the vehicles are totally deregulated. Everybody, or as I was coming to this studio on Kuba Road, people have imported the vehicles and they are selling them at a price that will give them a profit. And buyers and consumers are interacting. Yeah. In addition to the vehicle itself, you need spare parts. The spare parts are deregulated. You need engine oil. Because if you have a petrol, you have the petrol, you have the vehicle, you can't run a vehicle. You need engine oil. The engine oil is deregulated. So everything about that is deregulated. So the question is why then petrol? Why is petrol so special? Because the government should be concerned about the price we buy food, which is more important to life than petrol. Because if you and I don't eat food, after a few days, we're going to die. But we can afford not to have anything to do with petrol and we will live. How about pharmaceuticals? Because if we're sick and we don't take drugs, we're going to die. But the federal government is not bothered about how much we buy paracetamol. And paracetamol is sold at different prices depending on which shop you even go to. If you enter a shop in Maitama or Asokoro, I guess you will buy paracetamol at a different price than you buy it in Lugbe. That is what we call market forces. And the federal government has allowed market forces to play out in almost all the sectors in Nigeria except petrol, except power sector, and some other ones. So I don't see any reason why NNPC is so important. NNPC benefiting from what they should have been providing to us. If NNPC let our 4 refineries to work with a combined refining capacity of 450,000 barrels, we will not import a dime of petrol into this country. So President Tinubu should have told them to step aside. As we speak today, Nigerian businesses would have got petrol on the high seas in tankers coming to Nigeria. And immediately what happens here is that if Mr. A brings his own petrol and is selling it at 400, Mr. B, in a bid to take the market, can sell his for 350. Mr. C will try everything to get it down to 300. So that as the market is hitting each other, the price of petrol will now become the real price, the actual price, because the players will now be making only marginal profits. But the situation where we have only the NNPC, if you ask the NNPC now, how did you arrive at 537 naira? They're not going to tell you. Let me tell you one thing. I live in the United Kingdom, all right? Petrol in the United Kingdom as we speak is £1.60 per litre, all right? But inside that £1.60, the government levies fuel duty 40%, VAT 20%. If you remove 60% of £1.60 and convert it into naira, it's less than 537. So how is it possible that Britons, whose minimum wage is £1,200 a month, can buy petrol at cheaper rates than Nigeria, whose minimum wage is 30,000 naira? So these are the questions that President Tinubu needs to ask the NNPC. It's not late. He can ask them now, even. And then, dealing with the NNPC, the next thing President Tinubu would have done is read the Riot Act to the NNPC and say, within 6 months, I want the refineries to work. And I can assure you that the refineries will work in 6 months because they are dead. They only just need to be repaired and fixed. Yeah? And then, of course, President Tinubu needs to ask the NNPC that they should they should just stop these 450,000 barrels of crude oil, of our crude oil, that they send to foreign refineries, who refine and send to them. And there's another big question there. If NNPC takes our crude and sends it to refineries abroad, and they refine and then bring it back to us, then how are we talking about subsidy? Was that not supposed to be our crude that is now coming back in petrol? These are the questions that President Tinubu needs to ask. He needs to look at it.
But again, I have to ask if you can venture a guess or a thought. Why do you think there's so much, mysticism around this? Even the other day, the group managing director, Melekari, was at an interview, and speaking about the price, like you said, the 537, he wouldn't even, mention a direct price or be specific. And I'm wondering, what does this shroudry and hidden details, who does it benefit, or what point is it? Is there any way it affects the market if the average Nigerian knows this is how much is the landing cost, this is how much was added, this is all these very little details? People say if you want to hide something from a black man, put it in a book. But at least the book exists, for him to ignore, so to speak. Well, we don't even really have things to look at to know the details. And I'm wondering, from a business perspective or economics or whatever, the exposure of this information, does it affect the market?
It does not affect the market in any way. Rather, it is to the benefit of the consumer. And the NNPC is doing this thing because it's a monopoly. Nigerians can't see petrol from any other source except the NNPC. And it is sad. Why it is sad is that, first and foremost, let's ask the question. The price of diesel is not carrying any subsidy. But diesel is actually the fuel that is used in the manufacturing sector. The buses, the mass transit buses you see ferrying workers in and out of Abuja and other cities, they are running on diesel. And the federal government didn't bother about that. How about kerosene? It's a fuel used by the poor. Federal government didn't even bother about that. And the federal government is now fixated with this petrol, upon which, like I said, it's a dark box. The NNPC can't give us anything about this thing. If you ask the group managing director of the NNPC, how many liters of petrol are consumed in Nigeria, he can't give you an answer. The other day, I heard him on TV saying he can give you an answer on how many liters have been lifted. But you know that once lifted, he has no control over where it goes. He could actually have control over where it goes if he wants to. And how do I mean? If you give a dealer, a major dealer, 100 trucks, all right? The NNPC can say we will pay subsidy only on the liters that you have dispensed into Nigerians' vehicles. Yes. So the NNPC can switch subsidy from the importation to the consumption. So that if you import and take it across the border, there's no subsidy on it. So all the petrol stations, we have to file their returns. Today we sold petrol to 1,000 cars. This car, 50 liters, 75, 20 liters, that is the figure upon which the NNPC can pay subsidy. For instance, if they want to. Yeah? But the most important thing is that the NNPC, President Tinubu, if his advisors are listening to me, should just tell the president to ask NNPC to walk away from the scene. They can even remain on the scene, but let him open up to competition. As we did in telecoms, the government didn't tell NITE to walk away. NITE, as we speak today, is there. But the government opened the gateway for other operators to come into the telecom sector. You get what I'm saying? And immediately other operators came into the telecoms. I know that to get a phone from NITEL in the 90s will cost you 50,000, 100,000, depending on where you were. Monies of those days. You get what I'm saying? We could be paying subsidy on phones till today if it was NITEL. So the NITEL says phone is 100,000. Just like NNPC said petrol is 537. And government will pay subsidy of 80,000. Say, okay, go and sell phones to Nigerians at 20,000. What happened? The MTNs, the Etisalas, the Airtels, the Glo came in. If you want to go and get a SIM card today, you can get it for free. And then you could probably get one of the small handsets for 5, 6, 7,000. You're on call, talking. And the service is more available around the country than when NITEL were offering the service. So that's what happens when government is in control. And that is exactly what President Tinubu needs to do.
All right, there's an issue here. I don't know if you can help us break down. People say when the presidential candidates were campaigning, they also remove subsidy. But I believe only one candidate. I might not be very accurate, but the PDP candidate, his intention has always been, even from past election cycles, to sell off the refineries, sell off, you know. And during President Buhari's tenure in 2022, when the Petroleum Industry Act was passed, people started to say this was some sort of middle ground where the NNPC is a private company, and now, you know, it works basically for profit, so on and so forth. So the question now is, what really is the difference from what you've described now, where the market was open to different telecoms sectors? Selling the refineries or selling, you know, the oil, government-owned oil sector, would it have? Is it an actual improvement compared to what we currently have, where the NNPC is said to be private? You know, because some people don't really understand what does it really mean if the NNPC is private? How does it change how they've always operated?
First and foremost, the so-called it was not even privatization; it was commercialization. because privatization would have meant the ownership of the NNPC would have changed. For instance, they could have sold the shares of NNPC to Nigerians so that you and I can buy shares and now be part owners of the NNPC. So it wasn't even privatization they did. They simply...
You're talking about the PIA?
Yes,
okay.
They commercialized the NNPC, meaning the NNPC, still being a government-owned enterprise, is now to operate like a private entity for profit making. But it's the same we could have said of NITEL. We could have said NITEL operate. Are they not there? NITEL, they are there. Do you understand? Because globally, the government is not a good businessman. If you go to the UK, you hear enterprises with the name British. British Airways, British Gas, British Telecoms, British Petroleum, all of those British things. They used to be government owned. But even there, where systems are strong, institutions are strong, law enforcement is strong, government realized that they couldn't do this. And they shipped all those things out into the private sector. Not to talk about Nigeria where anything goes. So the best deal for the refineries is, okay, I understand the emotions that are involved. Because if you recall, President Obasanjo, close to when he was to leave office, he sold off the refineries. Yeah, he sold off the refineries.
To who?
He sold off the refineries to the likes of Otedola, to Dangote. They bought all Nigeria 4 refineries. Yes, but there was an uproar that he sold it to his cronies, to his friends and all of that. And so when President Yaradua took office, he succumbed to public pressure and reversed the sale of the refineries and took them back into the ownership of the government to be run by the NNPC. Okay? So if that kind of emotional attachment of Nigerians to their own publicly owned assets is still there, still President Tinubu can do one thing. He can keep the ownership of the refineries intact, but he can still lease the refineries out to global operators or refining business to come in with their capital, with their expertise, with their technology, and with their pedigree over time, and change the fate of our refineries. Because, you know, like I was telling someone, I used to work in the oil and gas industry. I worked in the oil and gas industry over 20 years. There are 2 aspects to the oil and gas industry, upstream, downstream. Upstream is the big issue. As if you want to know whether there's oil in the ground here, where we are in Katampe, it takes billions of dollars, technology, expertise, everything to know and then extract it out. When it comes to downstream, which is the refining, it's the simplest of processes. What does refinery mean? Put crude oil into a big tank and put fire under it. As the intensity of the fire increases, you will see petroleum products dropping out at different degrees of temperature. One of the very first that drops out is diesel. That's why you look at those boys in the Niger Delta. Yeah. You see what they do? They put crude oil that they have stolen into big tanks, and you see them with fire under. As that fire is burning, you will see them with a pipe out into another drum. What is dropping there is real diesel. It's not adulterated diesel. If you put it in any engine, it will work perfectly, because that is refining. Refining is cook petroleum and collect the different products at different levels of temperature. NNPC can't do it. The NNPC can do it. As simple as it is. Compare that to upstream, where the foreign companies like the Shells, the Mobiles, the Chevrons are involved. Have you ever heard one day that Nigeria produced 0 barrels of crude oil? No. They're producing it every day. Every day they are producing it non-stop from 1950, when we started till today. There has never been outage of production of crude oil, which is the more difficult thing to do. But we simply cannot refine. That is to tell you the ineptitude in NNPC. That the simplest of the processes under your care, as we speak today, Nigeria is the only oil producing country in the world that is refining 0 barrels of crude oil on its soil. The only oil producing country in the world. The likes of Singapore, who has 0 barrels of production of crude oil, has one of the biggest refining capacities in the world. And that NNPC managing director, when I see him on TV, I feel shame for him because he takes his crude oil in Nigeria and ships it more than 6,000 miles, close to 10,000 miles to Singapore, refines it in Singapore and ships back the products back into Nigeria. He shouldn't even be in his job. He should not be in his job. Because what we're talking about is that, like I'm from Benue, what we're talking about is like a farmer in Benue sends his yams to Lagos. They pound the yam in Lagos and then bring pounded yam from Lagos to come and feed his children. And then the cost of the pounded yam is very high because you are putting in the cost of transportation or yam to Lagos, cost of pounding yam in Lagos, which is higher than pounding in Benue, because in Lagos you have to pay someone good money because rent is high, everything is high for them to pound the yam there, whereas in Benue the rent is lower, you know, and then you bring the pounded yam. That's what it. This 537 that this NNPC CEO, as he calls himself now, is forcing down our throat includes the cost of taking our crude oil from here to Singapore, includes the cost of refining the crude oil in Singapore, includes the cost of bringing the products from Singapore, the insurance cost, the shipping cost, the port handling charges, the demurrage, everything is inside the 537. Why should he be in his job? Because if you remove all of those things, would have already taken about 200, 250 away from the 537.
So why is it said that even when the Dangote refinery starts working, that the prices will not go down in any way, that it will still be, the prices seen around the world,
He's not being honest in his analysis. I read that somewhere, where, whether it was him or somebody that said, Dangote refinery petroleum products will not cost less than what we're importing now. That means some people are not being transparent with the data. The analogy I gave you now, if somebody says the pounded yam, pounded in Benue, with Benue yams, is going to cost the same with the pounded yam that Benue yams were sent to Lagos, pounded in Lagos, and then sent back to Benue, that person is not being honest with his data. Because Dangote refinery, I don't think they have laid pipes from the Niger Delta where oil is produced into Dangote refinery. So I believe they are going to bring crude through shipping. That's why they have a big jetty. Yeah. Think about the cost of shipping crude from Focado's terminal, Bonit terminal, or Brass terminal, or Kwaibo terminal in Niger Delta, just in Lekki there, and drop it off, compared to shipping that crude to Singapore. Then think about the cost of refining the crude in Singapore, where the minimum wage is hundreds of times more than Nigeria's. Then think about the cost of bringing the refined products of Singapore back to Nigeria. And somebody will say Dangote's production right there in Lekki will cost the same as what went to Singapore and came back. That means somebody is already preparing us for being cheated by the Dangote refinery products. Somebody is already setting our minds to that. And let me tell you, it will be solved if President Tinubu totally deregulates the downstream sector. What that means is that if Dangote is producing his petrol in Lekki and selling it to us at the same cost of petrol coming from elsewhere, then let other people go and bring petrol from elsewhere. If they land it at cheaper rates, we will be buying the one that is coming from elsewhere and leaving Dangote with his own. Then when Dangote sees daylight, he will now say, no, if I don't reduce my price, I will not sell. This is economics. This is competition. This is when the consumer is in charge. Can't you see now, if you go on TV now, one of the biggest adverts on TV about the telecoms, they are fighting for market share. They're fighting for us. So MTN cannot afford to increase their price. We report, they know that. So whatever they are making now is marginal profits. The government regulators are also in a competitive environment. You need to have strong regulatory regimes. Like if we're talking about petrol now, the downstream authority needs to be strengthened, properly strengthened, so that if people are bringing in petrol, they have a testing regime at the port to ensure that whatever is coming in is fit for consumption. Then the regulatory authority has to ensure there's no collusion between the players. That's what we call price fixing. If you see it elsewhere, if regulators catch operators fixing price, they deal with them heavily, as in like fines running into billions of dollars. Because if you allow them to fix price, then the consumer won't get the best deal. So you just allow them to go. Allow them to go and fight for market share. And as they are fighting for market share, they are making life easy for us. One day, if this thing happens, as I'm saying, President Tinubu should let it happen. One day, you will see marketers having few vouchers. Like you have a card. Oh, if you come and if you buy petrol in my station up to 50,000, you can win something. You can. That is how they woo you. When they know that the market is highly competitive, not what NNPC is doing to us now.
All right. If we can quickly go back to, or before we go back to your recommendations, I just wanted to your thoughts on this particular issue about the method in which President Tinubu removed the subsidy. People say that if he had allowed for, you mentioned consultations, bringing the stakeholders, asking questions, and people say that for years, no one has been able to remove subsidy because they go through these processes. And that before they end up, with the consultations and the, whatever, the cabals, so to speak, somehow get their hand in and the process is cut short again and again. And they said perhaps this was the only way for him to just go head first into it, remove it, and then think about the consequences later. Because even President Buhari, who under him the PIA was signed, which basically kind of removed the subsidy, he still provided for it and kept extending it again and again. And people say that's what we would have seen. Constant pushing of deadlines till at the end of the day, as they call it, the organized crime that is prevalent within the subsidy regime continues. So do you think he was trying to fight, whatever forces would have stopped him in this Gestapo manner?
If President Tinubu, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and President of Nigeria, really, really, resolutely intended to fight those forces, he will fight them. And immediately he begins to fight those forces will align. Because you cannot fight the President of Nigeria. He will come upon you with everything. What President Tinubu did was suicidal. You know why? The real impact of this petrol price hike is not yet known. It will be known because there are some aspects of the economy that are still waiting that maybe there will be a reversal. The immediate ones that you can see is the fact that people who transported themselves with maybe 200 naira to work are now having to transport with themselves with 500, 700 to work. That's the immediate one. But the ripple effect of this price hike is going to be felt in many other sectors of the economy. Without the people's wages increasing, with a Nigeria that we already agreed, even by government's data, that there was multi-dimensional poverty. Increasing the price of petrol from 195 to 537, which is 175% increase, President Tinubu has sent a lot many more Nigerians into the poverty trap. He shouldn't have done this. He had 1 month of subsidy provided for in the budget. I heard the CEO of the NNPC made a carry say, yes, there is 1 month, but they were not being paid. They were being owed. And he exhibited a bit of timidity because as CEO of NNPC, he knows about budget. that when you have a budget, you fund the budget. The federal government budget was funded partly by internally generated revenue, partly by loans. So every single kobo that was provided in the 2023 budget has a source. And it's only a matter of time that he would have been paid. It's not as if the money was not provided for. The government of President Buhari, in setting up that budget, also say this is how we are going to get the money to fund the budget. So his money would have been paid. He didn't need to use the fact that he's being owed to overnight increase the price of petrol from 195 to 537. So President Tinubu needs to take a step back. Do you understand? Because you see what is happening now is that the people are under pressure. People are under serious pressure. Now, before I came here, I was speaking to a young lady that came to us. We were trying to see if we can give her something to do. And we say, where do you come from? She said she comes from Ogbewe. Ogbewe is not really far. So how much do you pay? She pays 700 to come, 700 to go. That's 1,400 per day. If you multiply that by 20 days, that is 28,000. The minimum wage is 30,000. So what then that means is that if this lady is on minimum wage, then her minimum wage has actually become transport fare. How is she going to feed? How is she going to have a place to put her head? How is she going to clothe herself or take care of other things? And it's not as if it's like those days when, in fact, I discovered something recently that really gave me sleepless nights. I went to Makodi, and then there was someone that was sick that went to hospital, and I went to see them, and I realized that unlike in those days when we were growing up in Nigeria, where the government hospitals will consult for free for you. Initially, they were giving us drugs. When I was growing up, government hospitals, general hospitals, go to general hospital, card is free, consultation is free, test is free, drugs are free. Even if you go on admission, it's free. It now moved to a point where they will do consultation for you and then write prescription for you to go and buy your drugs. Today, the government hospitals are charging people 30,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 to attend to them. Government hospitals. Where will Nigerians have money to attend government hospitals? If Nigerians can no longer now afford government hospitals, where do they go when they are sick? Are those the kind of people that you now come and visit this kind of price hike in petrol, which is a commodity that affects every aspect of our economy? Because watch out for what will happen in the market very soon. When the cost of transportation of those things starts coming in, you have farmers who are using pumps to do irrigation. He was filling his pump with 200 naira petrol. Now he's filling with 600. When he now produces his tomato or onion or pepper, you think he will still sell it at the old price? Nigerians are facing a lot, and I don't think this thing is necessary. President Tinubu first needed to allow other players to come into the market so that he can even judge for himself what the real price of a liter of petrol is, and not swallow what the NNPC, a monopoly, a sole importer, the same people that killed our refinery. Why doesn't even President Tinubu think that they deliberately killed the refineries so that they now have the leeway to be doing this importation and making money from it? It was a bad decision. He can still reverse it.
So what other recommendations do you have? You've listed a few already.
Yes, so my article which you referred to was actually berating the labor leaders. The government already pulled the gun by increasing prices of petrol, which has automatically increased the prices of transportation, food, and other things for the workers. So the labor union are now going to a negotiating table with their members already facing higher costs in the markets. And they moved away from the negotiation table with promises. And I thought that was a bit timid, because the minimum they would have insisted on was to ask the government to revert to the old price for the tenure of the budget, to the 30th of June. That would have given their members immediate reprieve from the transport cost. But you know, the danger is that when things increase in Nigeria, they don't even come down at the rate at which they increased.
Yes.
But again, if a transporter that was taking 200 naira is now taking 500 or 600 naira, and then petrol comes back to 195, and he's taking 500 or 600 naira, you will not be surprised that another one will start taking 300, another one will start taking, they will start so that they can carry the passengers. So that is one thing the labor union should have done, an immediate reversal, so that the President Tinubu pays the subsidy up to June. Within that time that they have got, the 1 month that they would have got, they would have now insisted on President Tinubu taking certain actions. Some of them have already discussed here. Number one, totally deregulate the downstream sector. Let whoever has capacity to bring petrol into Nigeria, bring it. Government is responsible for quality check. And you know what will happen? Immediately government opens that gateway. Those who already have the facilities, the jetties, the ships, everything, the contracts to import petrol, they will start bringing in the products. And as they are bringing in the products, Mr. A is selling his at 500, Mr. B will now adjust his meter to 450, the next guy is 400, like that. And people will see that they are making money, they are making money, It attracts them to come in. And the more players are now coming, the lower the price will start going down. Because probably the guy that is selling at 400, maybe he went to Singapore to go and buy his. And that guy now say, why don't I go to Rotterdam? If I go to Rotterdam, I'll cut the distance by maybe 2/3. And then when I bring it, instead of letting the ship stay off in the high seas till it's paying demurrage, I will carry my cargo to Calabar or to Port Harcourt or to Warri Port and discharge it there so that I'll do it quickly. I will avoid. That is how businesses use efficiencies to bring down their cost so that their price to the consumers will now be less and they will be taking the market share. Why can't we have this thing in the petroleum sector? Just as we have it in every other sector.
Oh, these are interesting and very salient questions to ask. Thanks for really breaking it down. Well, I want to ask a question now that is away from this. I believe we've done enough justice to this. It's a bit related, but Nigerians are wondering what's going on, and I don't know if maybe you might be able to shed more light on that. Just this morning, around the office here, a group of my colleagues were excitedly chattering to one another, and I found out that what they were speaking on is what has been in the news a lot, which is the price of gas, cooking gas. Apparently there's been a drastic drop, and people are wondering. People say, President Tinubu's removal of oil subsidy has affected gas, and so on and so forth. So people don't really know what's going on in that aspect. I wonder, is there something that we don't know about that has led to that reduction?
To be honest, it's news to me, as you speak to me, that the price of gas, or LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, or we popularly call cooking gas, has crashed. If that be the case, it's really good news. And what could that be the reason? I would think it's because the gas is coming in from the NLNG. Because in fact, there was, even though I'm an oil industry expert, I spent almost all my life in the oil industry, there was something I was never aware of. I was totally oblivious of. And that was the fact that Nigeria was going to as far as the United States to go and import LPG, cooking gas. When somebody said that thing, I said, no, it's not possible. Because up to that point, I thought all of our gas consumption in Nigeria is coming from the local production. But no, we actually spend money to sink oil and gas wells, produce gas to the surface, set it on fire, and then go as far as the United States to import gas. But then our own company, the NLNG in Nigeria, is now sending gas to Europe, sending gas to Asia, and so when that debate came up, I think the government listened, and the LNG started to pump a good quantity of their LPG production into the Nigerian market. That could be a reason. But in one of the recommendations that I made to the labor unions, I also harped on this gas issue. Because if Nigeria, with so much abundance of gas, if we harness the gas, then we are going to pipe that gas into every building. Like this building here will have gas piped into that you can use for cooking, you know, and then piped into industries as they use as fuel for industrialization. And then we use the gas in cars. Do you understand? We use the gas in cars instead of petrol. You know, just go to a gas station and fill your tank and move around. So that's one recommendation I gave to the labor unions that they should insist on. Of course, the other recommendation I gave to them was power. Because a good quantum of the petrol upon which this subsidy is being paid that has caused us all these pains is going into generators for power generation. If President Tinubu let the power sector totally, because it is not total now, totally deregulated, generation, transmission, distribution, totally deregulated, and Nigeria is now producing enough power for households and businesses, they will not put petrol in the generator again.
Although I believe, I think it's just today or perhaps yesterday, or some hours ago, the president has officially signed into law the Electricity Act, which has, distributed it to the states instead of the federal. Do you think this could have any effects in what you are speaking about?
Okay, so there's a difference between the law and the execution. Nigeria does not have any problem with laws. We have so many laws. Even the electricity, we have all sorts of laws in the electricity sector. What we need is action. And the action I mean is that regardless of what the president has signed today, as we speak today, the generation is privatized. The distribution is privatized. The transmission is 100% in the hands of government. Government that is going to the central bank to do ways and means to pay salaries is the one holding on to transmission. And transmission is a bottleneck because generation cannot generate what transmission cannot carry. Some of the national system failures we have been experiencing in the past come from the fact that generation tried to push a bit too much into transmission. The system just goes down. And distribution cannot supply what transmission does not give them. So transmission is a bottleneck. Let President Tinubu follow up with his signing of this law with action by saying, transmission, I'm privatizing you, go into the private sector. Whoever is the global operator in the power sector that wants to come and take transmission, I will give it to you in a transparent bidding process. like we talked about refineries. If he likes, he can keep the ownership as Nigerian, but let the people lease it and expand. You see, I was making a point the other day. Nigeria, as we speak today, is on 3,000 megawatts of electricity. The rest of the consumption in Nigeria, outside that 3,000, is being powered by petrol and diesel, and probably solar these days. Look at a country like India, our mate. There are 1.4 billion people. They are supplying 400,000 megawatts to their economy. Nigeria has 200 million people. If Nigeria were to supply power to India based on our supply ratings, we'll be giving them 21,000 megawatts. And how do I mean 21,000 megawatts? Because the population of India is 7 times the population of Nigeria. And since Nigeria is giving 3,000 megawatts to its population, multiplied 3 by 7, 21,000 megawatts is what India would have got if we were to give them. How much are they doing? 400,000. Check the difference between 21,000 and 400,000. Even if we were on 40,000, which is 10% of India's, we will be maybe somewhere. Brazil, similar population like us, our mate, 150,000 megawatts daily. And as we speak here today, we're talking 3,000 megawatts. Come on, let's be serious. We're not even talking 30,000 megawatts, 3. So that's the one area President Tinubu needs to go to. Totally privatize the sector, totally deregulate it, so that power players will bring in their money. You know, I always like to make the example of the telecoms. The MTNs and the Airtels and the Glos have put into Nigeria more than $100 billion of investment. All these marks you see around, everything for them to distribute this thing, telecoms in Nigeria. That's the money the federal government doesn't have. So the only way for us to make a way forward is to let it go. If they don't let it go, President Buhari came in 2015 with a promise that they were going to solve the power problem. Did he solve it? No. Why? He didn't let it go into the private sector. He held on to it.
I wonder, what is the benefit of this holding on to things? The refineries that Nigerians are so sentimental about, the same thing with power and so on. What really is the gain when it is within government control? You know, I'm just wondering.
I think it is competence and capacity on the part of the leaders. We have leaders that think very analog. They don't think modern. So the likes of President Buhari thinks very analog. He thinks like the post-colonial days when government was in control of everything. You know, post-colonial days, it was only government that had the money to do rail, to do airports, to do power, to do water, to do all that. The private sector hadn't generated the capacity that they have today. Modern leaders now know that there is a power shift in the financial capital from government to the private sector. Because there are people in the world today, the likes of Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, all of Warren Buffett, they earn more than Nigeria. Yeah. How much is Nigeria budget? This 17 trillion or so that we budgeted is like $30 billion. What is $30 billion? It's not even 1 day sales of Apple. It's not even 1 day sales of Apple. So the financial powerhouse has moved from government into the private sector. So, sorry, nations that are doing well are the ones that understand this step change. And so they have transferred their means of economic activity into the private sector. Then they sit back to do regulation. You understand? But the likes of President Buhari was thinking post-colonial, very analog. He didn't understand it. I hope President Tinubu should understand it. I hope so. Once he understands it, you will not even know that Nigeria is Nigeria. But we have examples. Look at telecoms. Almost every village you go to now, you'll be able to make a call. Almost every village. When Naite was in charge, what was it? There was no. I was in Warri when I married my wife, who was here in Abuja. When I took her to Warri, she had to sell her Note 9 Note phone because we didn't have it in Warri. As big as Warri is a city, Naite didn't provide phone there. That's government for you. But now, and you recall in those days of Naite, a minister of telephone, or rather minister of communication, said telephone was not for the poor. Because Naite was making him believe so. Naite made it look a big deal. They made it look like, oh, it's impossible to give phones to Nigerians at cheap rates. And the minister went and made a useless comment. Today, our Okada riders and artisans and everybody not having phones, powered by the private sector. The same thing will happen to the power sector, will happen to the rail sector, will happen to water, will happen to roads, will happen to steel, to happen to all of those basic economic factors that need to jumpstart this economy.
That is interesting. I do hope, like you said, the relevant stakeholders are listening, perhaps advisors of President Tinubu, and do pass this on to him. Thank you so much for coming and for your thoughts and analysis today.
Thank you so much, Famous, and thanks to our viewers. It's nice having this interaction.